Ahoy, adventurers! Your old buddy Hambone is here with a brand new coupon code from our friends over at Noble Knight Games. That's right, Noble Knight is back with another code, this time for $5 off. Orders $25 or more, and that code is MONSTERS. Now, what's cool about this code is now is the best time to be hanging out safe and sound at home playing games with your friends and family. So this is a great way to get a nice little discount on the game that you've been thinking about picking up and having shipped directly to your house. If you're local to Noble Knight is doing touch-free curbside pickup Monday through Saturday, noon to 5 p.m. All you got to do is call ahead and order your items online. You can check out more info on that on their website, nobleknight.com. And make sure when you check out, you use the code MONSTERS. That's MONSTERS. MONSTERS for $5 off. Your order's $25 or more, now through June 21st.
This is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me as always is the editor-in-chief of Unwinnable.com. He doesn't run from his shadow like a groundhog, Stu Horvath.
How do you know that? Are you sure?
I'm just spitballing here, man. We already did another episode where the shadow people, so I already used the quote from The Shadow, so I'm really pulling at strings here for a joke.
Yeah. We should have done this in a different order, I feel like.
I know.
Yeah. Anyway.
With that being said, today we're talking about Shadowrun.
Shadowrun.
Yeah, we're going to do the mysterious voice thing, aren't we? So, Stu, why don't you tell me about Shadowrun?
So, Shadowrun, all right, I got to be honest. I don't think I've ever played Shadowrun. Not that that matters. Like, come on, let's all be honest. Everybody that is listening to this podcast has role-playing books on their shelves that they've never played. They just read them for their own enjoyment. I mean, like,
100%.
That's the truth of the matter. We all have more games than we'll ever play. But I feel like Shadowrun is sort of a big, gaping oversight for me because I actually really like Shadowrun. I made characters for it once. I don't think we ever played it, but I definitely rolled up a Street Samurai.
That sounds about right for Shadowrun.
Yeah. It came out in 1989 from FASA. It's a cyberpunk game set in like 2050-ish. But the thing is, it's not just cyberpunk. It's cyberpunk where magic has reawakened in the world. And America has like split up into several different nations. And Seattle, which is the primary setting of the game, is sort of sandwiched between American Indian nations and the Elven nation of, I don't know how to pronounce it, Ternagir?
Sure. Feels good to me.
Yeah, so elves are there, there's orcs, there's trolls, there's dwarves, and there's magic. So, like, you can have a party that is, like, a guy with a sword, which, like, okay, of course, a hacker, and an elven street mage. It's just weird. And Shadowrun is the start of these sort of games that combine genres, right? You have Shadowrun in 89, and then you have Rifts and Torg both come out in 1990. And all three of these games are all about smushing disparate elements into, one big, crazy, zany hole. I think that Shadowrun actually does it the best of the three. I think that Rifts is like way too ridiculous. I think that Torg is sort of way too ridiculous in a different way from Rifts. We'll get into that.
Yeah.
On another show. It's like there's so many flavors of ridiculous. Shadowrun really keeps it street level, and because of that, it just feels more, I don't want to use the word realistic because it's not, but it just feels more feasible. Basically, a Shadowrun is a small mercenary raid on your classic cyberpunk style mega corporation, either for industrial espionage or just wrecking the joint. And usually, you get tied up in some sort of conspiracy that involves magic and the end of the world, and things spiral out of control. And there's so much great flavor in the world. I love it. To me, it's a cyberpunk game that just happens to have fantasy elements. The other big cyberpunk game is Cyberpunk, right?
Right.
I actually like Shadowrun more than Cyberpunk.
So from what I know of people who've played both, Shadowrun is a little more nuanced than Cyberpunk. I mean, Cyberpunk, the name is right out there. It's Cyberpunk. You know who you're getting into bed with. With Shadowrun, there is a nice balance between, hey, this is magic, hey, this is technology, and this is where they meet in the delicious magic techno sandwich. And with that, you do have a little more wiggle room for the different types of role playing that people would want to do together. So have, oh, I'm a fantasy guy. Well, you have that flavor right there for you. I'm a person who does want to be the hacker in this game because, of course, everyone wants to be the hacker. It's a cyberpunky game, so you have a person who could be the hacker, and you have room for both at the table, so everyone can kind of get involved with it. So I actually got to play it a little earlier this year. So I'm actually coming at this from a place of slight experience because I've gotten to play Shadowrun and see the different kind of aspects of it, firsthand.
Well, since you're so experienced, you should have corrected me and said, no, Stu, they're not called hackers. They're called deckers. What's wrong with you?
I didn't pay that much attention at the table. I mean, just for those listening at home, when I join your group, baseline, I will play the meat shield who hits stuff because that's the easiest way for me to dip my toe into anything. Like, they told me about the hacker, the decker, whatever it was, and they're like, well, then you need to know this, 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 and this. I was like, well, how big of a gun can I have, and which way are the enemies? Because that's the guy that I want to be. And so,
samurai.
Yeah, exactly.
Or a Burke.
Yeah, I had a big gun. I had 2 big guns, actually, and I blew things up. I actually blew the building up, which seems to be kind of my MO in most RPGs. When in doubt, blow the building up.
Yeah.
So I found the game to be really challenging because there was a lot of dice mechanics to it that I wasn't fully used to. There was a lot of 6-sided dice getting rolled, and the GM was referring back to charts to see how much damage it did for the amount of dice that I was rolling. And I feel like I was rolling a lot of D6 for the level of character that I was at. So that I kind of felt to be a little cumbersome during my experience with it. However, the actual gameplay mechanic of it, the RP of it, I got to see the best of both worlds kind of unfolding at the table.
I just feel like Shadowrun has more heart than Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk is very cold to me, especially in that embrace of the style over substance 80s thing. And I feel like that just sort of diffuses throughout everything so that nobody cares about anything in Cyberpunk and everybody just wants a bigger gun or to get more chrome. And it's just like a frag fest. Like, I feel like Shadowrun, your characters have things that they conceivably will care about and are working in some way to make a better world. Cyberpunk 2020 is very cynical to me, where I think that Shadowrun is less so. And I like that.
Well, it's 2 different kinds of a dystopic future, right? Because Cyberpunk, in any kind of iteration that I've seen at Cyberpunk, it's very like nihilist, like, whatever, I don't care. It is what it is. I'm just trying to survive.
Leave a good looking corpse.
Exactly. Whereas with Shadowrun, there was a spirit to it. There was an energy to it. Like, you fell in with these group of people. They're desperately trying to make whatever situation they're in better for not just them and for the people around them. It's a different kind of movie. It's a very, very different kind of movie. Like, the characters that you're going to come across in the Shadowrun game, just baseline, give so much more of a shit.
Yeah, I think Cyberpunk, you have a better chance of everybody trying to stab you in the back, even if they're supposed to be your friends. Whereas in Shadowrun, there's like a real solidarity with the working class people of the streets,
Exactly.
And I dig that. And the other thing that I think that's interesting about the sort of Shadowrun Cyberpunk comparison is that a lot of the things that I take for granted as cool things that Cyberpunk did aesthetically, like a lot of the source books have like a rudimentary sort of tablet interface, where they have like scroll bars and buttons that, like,
Right.
if it wasn't a book, you could click. And like, I love that in Cyberpunk. Shadowrun did it first. Like,
Really?
yeah. Like, it was just one of those things because I've never really had a lot of Shadowrun books, and I got a whole bunch. And I was reading through them and I was just like, this is such a rip on Cyberpunk. And then I looked at the dates and I was just like, Shadowrun outdid Cyberpunk in a lot of like these little touches. My favorite Cyberpunk source book is the Chromebook, the lifestyle catalog that has like weapons and all sorts of stuff in it. And it's presented as like an internet site in a book. And that's totally lifted right off of the Street Samurai catalog. And it was one of those things where it's just like, once you line up those dates, like my mind exploded. It was like, whoosh.
That's crazy. And they got away with it, huh?
You can't really copyright that sort of thing, but it is sort of weird that like I never hear anybody talking about it. Maybe it's just that like people who play Cyberpunk are just like separate worlds, like sort of the difference between people who play D&D and people who play Warhammer. Like that wall is there.
Yeah, I guess I could see that. Well, what year did Cyberpunk 2020 come out?
The original Cyberpunk came out in 1988. Shadowrun comes out in 1989, and then Cyberpunk 2020 comes out in 1990.
Okay, there is time for them to kind of see what's going on. Or do you think this is kind of a thing where, you had the Snakepipe Hollow from Chaosium, and you also had a very similar Dungeons & Dragons module kind of coming out around the same time, hot on each other's heels. Like, they're both kind of having that, we are both in the same kind of headspace with this, and it's just a matter of who was actually made publication first.
It might be. I think that it's just such a brilliant idea because you got to remember in 89, 90, I guess Street Samurai Catalog came out in 89. It was a launch title. So think about what internet we had in 1989. We didn't. It's like a small design detail that we take for granted now because we have internet shopping and we have tablets and scroll screens and stuff. We didn't have that back then. I'm pretty sure I still had a monochrome monitor. But on the other hand, I think that it's just like such a keen observation of what technology is going to look like that I kind of think that it might have been a smart person at FASA and then the cyberpunk people kind of just lifted it. On the other side of the things, FASA is a much bigger company than Artel Saurian. So, like, do I think that? No. I mean, they're punk. Rip it off. It's cool. Like, it's fine. Like, I'm always on the side of the little guy.
Hey, listen, in fairness, I didn't even have a computer until like the Gateway 2. So,
With the cow print.
with the cow print on it, that thing was an atrocity. So this is kind of a crazy 4-year stretch because 88, you have Cyberpunk. 89, you have Shadowrun. 90, you have Cyberpunk 2020. And then Vampire the Masquerade drops in 1991. So you have a world that is completely outside of traditional Dungeons and Dragons. That is not just one flavor. You kind of got like two different versions of the same flavor. Like you got like chocolate chip and chocolate chip cookie dough with the Cyberpunk and the Shadowrun. But then you have like chocolate chip mint with Vampire the Masquerade.
Yeah, because when you boil Vampire the Masquerade down, it's basically a cyberpunk game without the cyber. Instead of having like mods and Chrome, you have vampire abilities.
And that was the thing. Around here, kids were playing Vampire the Masquerade, but the ones who weren't playing Vampire were playing Cyberpunk.
Yep.
That was always so surreal to me because I didn't know a lot of people who actually played Dungeons and Dragons because that was the Satan game, right? I mean, coming up when I came up, that was like the game that, parents were not really letting their kids get anything near. However, when kids are running around pretending to be vampires or cyberpunks, like no one batted an eye. And that was happening in real time.
Yeah. And Shadowrun does a really good job of anticipating what Vampire the Masquerade is going to be. The system is very similar in that it's a dice pool system. And the art, that street level, urban, gritty thing. You eventually have Tim Bradstreet doing art for both. You have just these fantastic, really detailed ink artists like Janet Alessio, Jeff Lobenstein, and Jim Nelson's character portraits are insane. They're just so good. But like all of these folks are establishing what a fantasy cyberpunk street level game world looks like. Granted, Tim Bradstreet brings a lot of muscle to Vampire the Masquerade, but it's all on that same gritty urban 90s thing. And Shadowrun beat everybody to the punch. I can't get over that. People who play Shadowrun are going to be like, oh yeah, duh, of course. That's why we play it. But like on the outside looking in, I'm shocked. And it's awesome. I love it.
When you look at the art of the original Shadowrun, and you look at the Tim Bradstreet art, especially in Vampire the Masquerade, the artwork in these two game systems was absolutely pivotal to the way film and most media was designed from here on out for things that had to do with science fiction and vampires.
Sure.
You could really trace back everything that changed from 1989 on. I mean, dude, the movie Hackers wouldn't have even been a thing without something like Shadowrun happening to it. I mean, look at the Blade the Vampire movies. Things have changed dramatically because of things that happened on the pages of these role-playing games.
Yeah, I absolutely believe that it came out of the role-playing games. There's other things that contributed to it, but I think that a big driving force was the visual aesthetic of these games. And the world is so weird and cool, and the art brings that alive. It's so good. That said, I don't really want to play Shadowrun.
Yeah.
Like, I was reading the rules recently because I did a whole bunch of posts on this, and I couldn't stop thinking that this is an overly complicated version of West End Games' Star Wars game, which also came out a couple years before. And I understand why they injected the complexity into it, because once those numbers start going up, like you're just rolling millions of dice and it gets out of hand and everything becomes easy and also unwieldy. So I understand why they injected these different interlocking systems, but it all comes together a lot more complicated than I want it to be.
I mean, dude, I hear you. I 100% hear you. I love rolling dice. I love rolling dice. And I'm sitting here at this table playing this game and I'm like, this is a lot of dice to seemingly do nothing.
Yeah.
Like, I've been playing a lot of games that work off the D100 system. you
Yeah.
know, and then, playing Cthulhu, playing Zweihander and things like that, where it's just like, okay, here's your number, roll under that number. If you roll really good under that number, this happens. If you roll high over that number, this happens. It's kind of all I need. I'd rather be able to get lost in the actual story and the gameplay of it rather than having to like cross-reference like charts about my gun and kind of figure out like, why am I rolling 22 dice?
Yeah, and I'm definitely more in the simple is better camp the older I get. The Shadowrun is almost simple. Like it kind of frustrates me in a way. It's just like it's almost there. But if I were to run a Shadowrun game, I wouldn't use the Shadowrun system. I would probably be more interested in using one of the Cyberpunk hacks for either Apocalypse World or Blades of the Dark. And Blades of the Dark is like a super crunchy game, but like all those systems work better for me. And like I feel like you could put them to better use in the Shadowrun kind of world.
So you would use it just as like a base setting and you'd use it for monsters, creatures, enemies, but then...
Yeah, and then just use the setting from Shadowrun. Like I think that would be a much more satisfying thing for me. And like for you, dear listener, that might be something completely different. You might think that I'm a heretic, and that's fine. You just got to find the game you want to play.
And that's it, folks. There's no wrong way to play. We just don't like some of them.
But no, I really love Shadowrun. I think it's great. I've played so many of the Shadowrun video games. The video games are great. The world is great. There's so much to love. You should check it out.
All right, Stu, do you have any final thoughts on Shadowrun?
Yeah, if you buy one Shadowrun book, try and track down Sprawl Sites from 1990. It's a toolkit book, and basically it gives you like a bunch of building layouts and random encounters that are keyed to the theme. So like you have troll encounters and you have corporate encounters, and they're just little seeds. And then you get a whole bunch of contacts, which is their NPC system. And I think that it just does such a great job of selling you on what the feel of the Shadowrun world is. And also, I think that more people should make books like that because it's just so damn useful. Like you could run a whole campaign on the fly using just like these, like, hey, this is, a layout for a restaurant, and I have, stats for like a hacker. So I could just put these things together and then throw an encounter on top of it. It's like all of these little modular parts. I don't understand why this is one of very few books like this that has ever been published, as far as I know. And like more of this, please, indie people, get Sprawl Sites and rip it off, please.
Allegedly.
I have one other thing that we're going to say. We're going to expand on it in another podcast, but Earth Dawn, which is FASA's fantasy game, is also a prequel to Shadowrun.
Well, look at that world building. I like it.
My brain exploded again when I found that out. I was just like, you got to be kidding me. They did a whole gigantic, crazy fantasy setting that doesn't feel anything like Earth. And then they're telling me that this turns into Earth and eventually to Shadowrun. That's madness.
Now, before we go home on this episode, our friends over at Planet X Games have a fully funded brand new Kickstarter called Escape from Skullcano Island. It gets bigger, badder, and better every single day. It is in the home stretch, and we hope that you're going to take a gander over at that. Give a quick listen and see what it's all about. Giant monsters summoned from the depths of the unknown. Horrific hell creatures to menace all of mankind. They walk, they kill. From the mad minds that brought you an Occurrence at Howling Crater and Jungle Tomb of the Mummy Bride, Planet X Games is back, and they're here once again to put the grind back in Grindhouse, this time with their brand new Kickstarter, Escape from Skullcano Island. Escape from Skullcano Island is a brand new high-level adventure module for 5th edition to challenge even the most experienced and stalwart adventurers. Something terrible is happening on this strange prehistoric place, and the fate of all mankind rests on the shoulders of those few daring enough to brave it. Dare you face these gigantic monsters that seek to obliterate mankind and crush the kingdoms of man under their clawed feet. So join us on this titanic thrill ride of kaiju-rific adventure and check out Escape from Skullcano Island by Planet X Games, May 11th on Kickstarter. All right, folks, this was another awesome episode of the Vintage RPG Podcast. Stu, where can the people find you?
They can find me on Instagram at Vintage RPG, talking about books like Shadowrun and Rifts and Torg and Cyberpunk and Earth Dawn and all sorts of stuff like that, and finding the weird connections in between them.
Very cool. You can find me on the Twitter at Handbreaker. I tweet about cute animals. I tweet about Dungeons and Dragons. I tweet about professional wrestling. You can find my day-to-day adventures in podcasting and in life over on Instagram at John Hambone McGuire. And folks, don't forget to join our Discord. We're talking about more stuff like this every single day. And if you're feeling saucy, stop on over to our Patreon, patreon.com/vintagerpg. You're going to get some bonus content. You're going to get some early release episodes, and Stu and I are running games there regularly now. So definitely think about checking that out. Patreon.com/VintageRPG. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dego West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.